Divide and conquer is how they win. This is the blueprint to how they have been able to dominate the entire globe. They do a good job of dividing and conquering. And that's their motto since the times of antiquity. This was the same strategy that Julius Caesar used in the 1st century BC, but he was not the first European man to do so. This strategy goes farther back. It was the Greeks who came up with the idea of divide and conquer. The ancient Greeks were the first to succeed in this strategy of divide and conquer amongst Europeans. It was first used by Philip II of Macedon, who used the tactic of pitting rival Greek city-states against one another to establish Macedonian dominance over Greece. Alexander the Great, who came after Philip II, would take this same philosophy of divide and conquer, but apply it to the enemies of Greece, that is, Persia. The Persian Empire, at its heights, stretched all the way to the borders of Greece. Alexander the Great knew that there was various Greek populations within the Persian Empire. When Alexander the Great began his quest to conquer the Persian Empire, it would be this divide between Greek ethnic populations and Persian rulers that he would take advantage of. The Greeks who chose to fight on behalf of the Persians, he viewed them as traitors and made a great example out of them. And the Greeks who chose to throw off the chains of the Persian Empire and join their Greek brethren in Alexander the Great, they would go on to conquer the Persian Empire. And this is what sparked the concept of Hellenism. Alexander the Great knew that in order for the Greeks to dominate the known world at the time, they had to unify the Greek populations that were scattered across the Mediterranean, because the same concept of divide and conquer could easily be used against them. So Alexander the Great knew the importance of having a unified front back at home and across his empire. The concept of Hellenism is the spreading of Greek culture. And while this concept of embracing Greek culture started with Greeks themselves, it did not end with Greeks. Alexander the Great had visions of unifying humanity all under Hellenism. Here's a quote by Plutarch in regards to Hellenism. It says, "Bringing men together from all over the world, mixing together as it were in a loving cup their lives, customs, marriages, and ways of living. He instructed all men to consider the inhabited world to be their native land, and they should regard as kinsmen all good men and the wicked as strangers." Plutarch wrote this passage in his essay on the fortune or the virtue of Alexander in 329 CE. In it, Plutarch argues that Alexander's conquests were not just destructive warfare, but an intentional effort to unify mankind and share the ideals of Greek civilization. By mixing together disparate cultures, Alexander sought to erase the rigid distinction between Greeks and barbarians, dictating that true citizenship and virtue were based on a person's character and education, rather than their geographic or ethnic origins. To sum it up, Alexander the Great wanted the rest of the known world to adopt Eurocentrism, which is essentially Greek culture. And it still is today, as you will see throughout this video. But before I bring up examples in the modern age, I can't go on without mentioning another important figure when it comes to Hellenization, and that is King Antiochus Epiphanes. This man severely persecuted Jews in an attempt to forcibly impose Greek Hellenistic culture upon them. In 167 BC, he plundered the temple in Jerusalem, outlawed core practices that the Jews kept, like circumcision and keeping the Sabbath, and he forced Jews to worship pagan gods and consume pork. All of these things went against the customs and laws of the Jews, who were the indigenous people in this circumstance. The Greeks were the invaders. They came to impose their culture on the Jews. This is something that still goes on today. But I also can't fail to mention that there was Jews who actually sided with the Greeks in doing so. There was a cultural divide between the Jews themselves. Okay, so this was the divide between the Jews that the Greeks would take advantage of. You had Hellenistic Jews who wanted to adopt Greek culture, and you had Hebraic Jews who wanted to hang on to their heritage and their own culture. So this divide was centered on language, scriptural interpretation, and assimilation. Hebraic Jews were traditionalists who spoke Hebrew or Aramaic and lived in Judea, while Hellenistic Jews were Greek-speaking diaspora Jews who adopted aspects of Greco-Roman philosophy, their dress, as well as their educational norms. So pretty much you had a nation of people who are one and the same, but are divided over accepting a foreign power's culture over their own. Now, in the case of the foreign power, who do you think they were going to side with? The Greeks were always going to side with Hellenistic people no matter where they were at. In this case, they sided with the Hellenistic Jews. Despite initial success early on, the Greeks were not able to win this battle. The Hebrews, who wanted to hang on to their traditions, were able to overcome the Greeks. But this would not go on to last. Eventually, the Romans would come around and conquer them as well, and they would apply the same blueprint that the Greeks applied. Only this time would the Romans come out victorious. And the end result is you had millions of Jews being kicked out of their own homeland. You had their own homeland losing the name that it was given and being renamed by the conquerors Syria Palestinian, which we now know as Palestine today. And them same Jews would go on to lose their heritage, as scripture states. They would go on to lose their identity. These are not the same people that you see in the land today. These were the people that were scattered across the four corners of the world in captivity by the very same powers of Europe that we are discussing right now. After the fall of Rome and the Dark Age period that Europe would go through, their rise in power would come from adopting Greek and Roman philosophy and political practices. They would adopt things such as Hellenization, but it will be rebranded under a new disguise of something that matches the times. And that was first through religion, as we like to call it today, Christianity, Catholicism. It was during the Renaissance era that the Pope of Rome would apply the same strategies that ancient Greeks and Romans used against indigenous populations, the same strategy of divide and conquer. While Eurocentrism would still be the main method of doing so, it would have the backing of religion to authorize it, to justify what would take place. With the papal decree of 1493, the Pope of Rome granted Portuguese and Spain to divide and conquer the entire world. Each European nation will have rights to their own hemisphere on the sides of the poles. This was known as the doctrine of discovery, and it legitimized European dominion and subjugation of indigenous populations everywhere. As they flooded nations filled with indigenous people, with missionaries coming to preach the religion of Christianity from a Eurocentric viewpoint, they would use those who converted or adopted their way of life to go against those who held traditional beliefs, those who preferred to be independent than to be ruled over by a imperial power. So this was the strategy of the colonizers during the New Age. And as time went on, they would eventually apply new ways to bring about this divide in order to rule over those they wanted to subjugate. Originally, it was religion, it was language, class, and caste systems that would divide nations that they hoped to conquer. This is a strategy. This is something that they still use today, and it all traces back to Rome and Greece. The colonial powers used the strategy of divide and conquer by systematically separating social and cultural groups, partly because those groups would otherwise unite and may overpower the colonizing power. See, where these colonizers ended up, they were outnumbered by vast amounts of indigenous people. So, in order to conquer them, they had to get the own inhabitants of the land to side with them against those who wanted to resist. And this is still happening today, right before our very eyes, all over the world. Especially in the Middle East, you can see examples of how this has played out. Nations like the United States send in CIA operatives to fund rebel factions to fight against their own countrymen. Eventually, the nation collapses. Then they come in to fix their problems, quote unquote, and really all they're doing is stealing their resources.
But I actually stopped the war with Congo and Rwanda, and they said to me, please, please, we would love you to come and take our minerals, which we'll do.
But you are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there? Redevelopment?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East.
Just had a great meeting with the oil executives. We've sort of formed a deal. They're going to be going in with hundreds of billions of dollars and drilling oil, and it's good for Venezuela and it's great for the United States. A lot of money is going to be made. Oil prices will come down, although they are getting down pretty good now without it. And it was a great meeting we had today with the biggest companies anywhere in the world.
The CIA began its support for Iranian Kurdish forces a few months before this war started. That's what a senior official here in Iraqi Kurdistan just told me. He said that they are, quote, very frightened about the possibility of retaliatory strikes from Iran if those Kurdish Iranian forces launch some kind of a ground operation into Western Iran with U.S. and Israeli support, as we first reported last night. He said,
if I had my choice, what would I like to do? Take the oil. Because it's there for the taking. There's not a thing they can do about it. Unfortunately, the American people would like to see us come home. If it were up to me, I'd take the oil, I'd keep the oil, I would make plenty of money. And I'd also take care of the people of Iran, much better than they've been taken care of.
This is what you call neocolonialism. Colonialism has never died out. It still goes on. I gave you the history because once you understand the foundation of where it sprang up, you will start to identify where it is still taking place today. When you see nations fighting over ethnic, religious, or tribal tensions, pay attention to the foreign powers of today. Pay attention to what side these foreign powers choose to back and support. It's not about which side has the moral high ground. It's not about which side is good and who's bad. It is always about the side that is going to allow them to impose their will over the said nation. And just as history foretells, it is always the people who is willing to sell out their own nation that they are going to support. All throughout the colonial age, this is what has happened.
They caught him on his way to Stanleyville and flew him back. Patrice Lumumba securely wrote. And with him were men who served in his cabinet when he was Prime Minister. They were bundled into a heavily guarded lorry and driven off towards a place called Binza. Lumumba had been under house arrest, protected by UN troops in Leopoldville, when he escaped. His recapture was quite a triumph for Colonel Mobutu, who now saw his enemy arrive. Lumumba's bonds are tightened. They were taking no chances. And his wife and child watch his humiliation. The whole affair, of course, serves to underline once again the conditions prevailing in the Congo. It's not enough to arrest a man. He must apparently be beaten up as well. Then put him on trial later, no doubt.
Lumumba had alarmed the West with overtures to Moscow at the height of the Cold War. He also angered Belgium with a speech criticising the colonisation of his country, which included atrocities committed under the brutal rule of King Leopold II.
But now I'm going to tell you what you can do to prevent this from happening. And the moral reasoning behind this is the Most High supports those who stands up for their people. We know that he backed Moses for standing up for his people. Moses could have chose to side with the Egyptians, yet he stood for his people, and the Most High favored him. Secondly, we know that the Most High commanded us to love our neighbors just as we love ourselves. We cannot love our neighbors if we do not love those who are closest to us. We cannot love our neighbors if we do not love our own brother. So before I give you the answer of how to combat colonialism and the modern-day Hellenization that Europeans impose on indigenous people all across the world, I first want you to know that this isn't just politically based. This is also spiritually based. But moving on to how we combat this, it is very simple. Never abandon your people or your roots. This is how they conquer you. It is vital that you know your history. It is vital that you know your heritage. It's vital that you know your lineage, our identity, and that you maintain that, because otherwise you are a tree without roots. You are a case of a lost identity who now has no choice but to accept what your conquerors throw upon you as far as your own identity goes. You would have to accept their version of your own history and lineage and identity, as well as cultural practices. I know this because this is what I personally experienced being a descendant of so-called black slaves in America. And I know that other people all across the world has gone through this same thing. And it is by this that we can relate.
Did you know the language they tried to erase is in your mouth every single day? When Spanish colonizers invaded Mexico, they banned Nahuatl. They punished indigenous people for speaking it. They wanted to kill the language of the Aztecs. But here's what they didn't count on. Every time you say chocolate, you're speaking Nahuatl. Zocolatl. Bitter water. Tomato, tomatl. The plump fruit, avocado, ahuacatl. Coyote, coyotl. Chili, guacamole, tamale. All Nahuatl. They couldn't erase it because it was woven into the land, into the food, into the animals, into the very fabric of what Mexico is. Today, over 1.5 million people still speak Nahuatl in central Mexico. It never died. And every time you order guacamole or say the word Mexico, you're keeping it alive. The colonizers tried to silence us, but our language is still here. in your kitchen, on your tongue.
So something just as simple as language can tell a lot about your identity and where you come from and your history. Once they're able to change your language to that of their own, you then start to lose that identity that you once had. But luckily, as you've seen in the video, these indigenous people of America were able to preserve some of that language. However, here for so-called Black Americans, that was something that was stripped away from us. We were strangers in a foreign land, ruled over by people who spoke a foreign language that they forced upon us. But yeah, it was these very indigenous people that would come to our aid in our time of trouble.
Black presence is everywhere.
Yeah.
Mexico, go to Mexico. You see black, Oaxaca, Mexico. 200,000 Africans, there's black Mexicans in Oaxaca. There's Oaxaca restaurants in LA. Oaxaca, Mexico, black Mexicans. And Mexicans actually helped slaves, black slaves back in the day in the 1800s. They helped slaves. That's why when you see Mexicans and blacks clash, I go, you don't know your history. They don't know the history.
And if you remove
You mayate, what? You know the history of us? You helped black slaves back in the day, but they make sure they shut all that shit down so they don't. So this doesn't happen.
Keep all that fight.
If this happens, game over.
These are the sights and sounds of El Día de los Negros, or Day of the Blacks, celebrated on Juneteenth in a town called Nacimiento de los Negros in Coahuila, Mexico.
My name is Ashley Rodriguez, and I'm a descendant of the Black Seminole Indian. My first time actually going to Nacimiento, I was, I think, 5 or 6 years old. And then from then on, we'll kind of make trips periodically down to Nacimiento to celebrate Juneteenth. Nobody really knows about the Mexican side of it.
Nacimiento de los Negros, which translates to birthplace of the blacks, is the town where the Black Seminoles, or Negros Mascogos, settled in 1849, just a few hours south of the Texas border. They are descended from slaves who escaped to Florida and later made their way down to Mexico.
We're talking about the 18th century, more or less. When they got to Florida, they mixed culturally with the Indian Seminoles, and they became the Black Seminoles. They were removed during the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, which was then the Indian Territory.
So once they got to Oklahoma, where they told them that they would be free and have land, they realized that it wasn't true, it was a lie, and they can come and take them anytime they wanted to, the masters. So they decided, they had to leave.
So it was a very harsh, terrible journey that our people had to go through to get to freedom. They didn't allow them freedom there in Oklahoma. And John, Horse, and Wildcat, they heard, that there's a place in Mexico that they could go to, that they could be free.
Mexico needed to hire people to defend the border from the possibility of more U.S. invasion. So what happened with the Black Seminoles is that they managed to negotiate a deal with the Mexican state in exchange for land and citizenship.
Karina and Dina grew up knowing little about their heritage, but are now dedicated to preserving their stories.
We knew that my grandfather on my mom and my dad's side, they were both Black Seminoles, so we didn't know anything else. That's what we're working with, my cousins and I, on, teaching the history and preserving, the traditions.
Be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Tupac. My mother, when she gave birth to me, she was just coming out of jail, being in jail, because they was holding her for the trial. So she had all these women, strong women around her, and she was like, what am I going to name my son? And there was this lady who just came from Peru, and she was telling my mother this folk story about a true life Peruvian revolutionary named Tupac Amaru, who the government had told him, okay, he was fighting the government, and he was really winning. These little tribes was beating the government, and they said, okay, we want to stop fighting. We want to meet with Tupac Amaru. He came in and met with them, and they said, we want to cease the fighting. Would you please cease the fighting? Too many people are dying. We're going to give you what you asked for. He said, okay. Told him to cease fire. As soon as they said cease fire, they cut his arms off, cut his head off, cut his legs off, and stuck him on a stick and put him in the middle of the village. So this is my reminder. That's my reminder. Every time you say my name, that's my reminder to never compromise myself and never quit. There's no such thing as a...
So just wanted to show that how similar our struggles are when it comes to being victims of colonization and imperialism. This is another form of divide and conquer that they would like to apply. They would want to see black and brown people go against each other because, once again, unified, we can change a lot. But when we go against each other, they can take advantage of that. So it extends across borders. It is not just individual populations of people that must unify, but also people all across the world that must unify. Because as stated, this is a strategy that they have used everywhere, and I mean everywhere. And I know it's normal for nations to fight amongst themselves. Nations have always been in fighting since the beginning of time. But for the last 500 years, it has always been a European presence instigating, seeking to gain from the outcome of such infighting. Here's a quote by Mao Zedong of China. It says, Israel and Taiwan are bases of operation for imperialism in Asia. They created Israel for the Arabs and Taiwan for us. They both have the same objective. Here's a quote by Fidel Castro. What is Israel? It is an instrument of Yankee imperialism, and the United States is the instigator, the protector of that state. Now, ask yourself, are they lying about what they are saying? You see, the government of the United States claimed that these people were communists and that they were the bad guys. And of course, why else would they say anything different than that? Because they want to maintain global control and dominance over all these nations. Of course, they will label them as terrorists and bad guys. And indeed, maybe some of these people very much are bad people. There's bad rulers all across the world in almost every nation, from past to present. So I am not defending that point of view. I am just saying, is what they're saying about their nation being ruled over by imperial powers, is that true or not? Is it true or not that these imperial powers want to see a civil war take place between nations that they want to take advantage of?
The United States approved $11.1 billion in arms sales to Taiwan on Wednesday, marking the largest ever U.S. weapons package for the island. It comes as Beijing ramps up military and diplomatic pressure on Taiwan, which it views as its own territory, a position Taipei rejects. The deal covers 8 items, including HIMARS rocket systems, which have been used extensively by Ukraine against Russian forces.
And just recently, we have a perfect example of the outcome of such infighting in a nation. Maduro of Venezuela would have never allowed Israelis to step foot in Venezuela without there being a problem. They would have been arrested if he was still president of the country. He was disgusted by their crimes against humanity in Gaza. He was against them. Yet, he was betrayed by his very own people who were Eurocentric Venezuelans that preferred to be ruled over by colonial powers, or I should say neocolonial powers, such as United States and now Israel. And upon seeing how these events played out, I wouldn't even be surprised if that earthquake was deliberately done by these people. So this is why it's very important to never go against your own people. Never betray your people. Always stand with them, even if you'll have your disagreements. As long as there's an outsider trying to cause infighting to come to enslave you, always side with your people. If not, you get disastrous results that we are now seeing in Venezuela.
And amid the chaos on the ground in Venezuela, serious allegations about children being lost. And tonight, the government is reporting the arrest of police officers caught looting in the rubble. NBC6 politics reporter Hatzel Vela is following it all. Joins us from Doral, where members of the Venezuelan exile community are denouncing what's happening.
Cada hora cuenta.
Every hour, every life counts. Concern from members of the Venezuelan exile community over the situation in Venezuela.
¿Dónde están nuestros niños?
Activists asking, where are the children? Adding, this is a massive crisis of family separation. Also telling us that aside from rescue efforts, a priority should be returning kids to their parents as soon as possible. At this point, they say there's no data showing how many kids have been rescued or returned to their families.
En crear un Centro Nacional de Protección Infantil y Reunificación Familiar.
These folks are demanding a national center for the protection of children and the reunification of families. Tonight, some serious allegations about the current state of affairs when it comes to children in Venezuela.
Hemos visto que hay
Almost half of the victims of the earthquake in Haiti were under the age of 18, which means about 500,000 children were cast into the streets, into crowded orphanages, or makeshift camps. Untold thousands of kids were separated from their families, threatened by hunger, disease, sexual assault, and even a modern-day slave trade. This past winter, in the aftermath of the quake, we spent 6 weeks around Port-au-Prince with an American charity called the Global Orphan Project. We found an emergency that was still unfolding as rescue workers raced the clock to save the lost children of Haiti.
On January 15, 2010, the Israel Defense Forces sent a delegation to Haiti in order to aid with the relief effort after the earthquake that struck the island. The IDF sent over 220 personnel in order to treat medical patients and to launch search and rescue missions throughout the capital, Port-au-Prince.
That's the question of the adoption, because I have a lot of petition for that, but they have to be very prudent because there is a lot of cautious. Because there is a lot of traffic in that kind of.
You mean illegal child trafficking?
Yeah, even if it's it seems to be legal, but a lot of organizations, they come and they say there were children on the street. We are going to bring them to the States, and we have already reports of a lot of trafficking, even of organ trafficking.
Of organ trafficking?
Yeah.
Now?
Now, already.
Of the victims of the earthquake?
Yeah. So.
Do you know that for sure?
Yeah, I know that for sure, and it was discussed in Montreal during the conference.
And do you know for sure that children are being trafficked now?
There is children trafficking for children and adult person also, because they need all types.
But I mean, live children, are they being trafficked now?
The report I received, yes.
How and why did over 1,000 children from Mizrahi Jewish families vanish in Israel? Did they die, or were these disappearances state-sanctioned abductions and essentially child trafficking? To answer that, we need to go back to 1948, the year Israel was established. Over 750,000 indigenous Palestinians, 80% of the Palestinian population at the time, had been violently displaced from Palestinian land by Zionist gangs. Masses of Jews were immigrating to the new state or being lured to live on the ethnically cleansed land and realize the goal of the Zionist project. But there was a slight problem. The Holocaust had wiped out millions of European Jews who had been expected to populate the new so-called Jewish state. Zionist leaders, now with a demographic crisis on their hands, began to encourage the mass immigration of Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. This mass importation led to what is known as the Yemenites' Children Affair. Between 1948 and 1950, around 50,000 Mizrahi Jews from Yemen were airlifted into Israel aboard US and British planes. Upon their arrival, these Yemenites, along with other Mizrahi families, were placed in overcrowded and poorly maintained transit camps, while the upper echelons of Zionist society, Ashkenazi and European Jews, were often given homes stolen from forcibly displaced Palestinians. Mizrahi Jews were looked down upon by Zionists and regarded as primitive and backwards. Slowly, an alarming pattern began to emerge. Hundreds of Mizrahi babies and young children began disappearing under eerily similar circumstances.
Israelis have once again been accused of stealing organs from the bodies of dead Palestinians, this time in its latest war on Gaza. Euromed Human Rights Monitor says it has documented Israeli soldiers confiscating dozens of dead bodies from northern Gaza's Al-Shifa and Indonesian hospitals, along with others in the south. Medical professionals have reportedly found vital organs missing. These include livers, kidneys, hearts, cochleas, and corneas.
But yeah, this same strategy of divide and conquer used by the colonial powers of Europe is still being played today. Recently, you had Jake Lang, who is a Jewish person cosplaying as a white supremacist, going and speaking out against black people in a disrespectful manner. Obviously, he wants to incite people. He wants to cause friction and race relations and goals of causing a civil war. Now, why would he want to do that as a Jewish person? Well, it takes eyes away from them. It takes the focus off of them. They're integrating our military to be a part of theirs and using it against the poor people of the world. They are going around the world destroying it. They don't want to be held accountable for their crimes, so they send in stupid people like Jake Lang to cause all this trouble to take the eyes off of them. And in spite of all this, I bet you will still find certain black people going along with what Jake Lang is saying. You will find people that would agree with what he is saying going against their very own people. And it's not just black people, it's Latinos as well and everybody else. There's traitors everywhere in every race, in every nation. There are traitors. There are people that's going to side with those who seek to oppress and take advantage of their people.
This is the true flag. That's the fake flag. You fucking traitor. Okay, say it again. Traitor, traitor, traitor. This is the true flag. That's the fake flag. You fucking traitor. Okay, say it again. Traitor, traitor, traitor.
And you could blame this type of divide that you see all across the world in the various nations that colonial or former colonial powers seek to control and extort. You could blame it on politics, but really it all goes back to Eurocentrism. The ruling power does not care what side of the political realm you fall on. They only care about maintaining control and dominance over you and your people. That is all that they care about.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master, good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes.
It's possible for me to be a great admirer of George Washington and also acknowledge he was a slaveholder. And that does not negate his greatness. It simply acknowledges that there's a profound, deep flaw in these founding fathers who were also geniuses and gave us these tools, and which is true of all of us, right? It's true of every president. It's that we're this mixed bag.
Once again, what you are seeing take place today is modern-day Hellenism. It is the Eurocentric replacement of indigenous culture of once independent nations of people, siding with their oppressors and upholding a system that was made to destroy and overlook them as a people. A system that was made to uplift some and to keep down others. In the end, remember, never abandon your people or your roots, or else you will be conquered. Thank you for watching, and Yah bless.